Landing in a vibrant Spanish-speaking country, feeling a surge of confidence because you already know a few words can quickly turn into a blush-inducing misunderstanding when you realize that embarrassed isn't what you think it is. You've just landed, the aroma of street food fills the air, and you're ready to dive into the local culture, confident your grasp of English will help you navigate a few similar-sounding Spanish words. But this seemingly helpful similarity is actually a linguistic booby trap because many words that look like English actually mean something entirely different. And trust me, you absolutely do not want to accidentally tell a kind stranger you're pregnant when all you mean is that you're feeling a bit red-faced. This common mix-up often happens with the Spanish word embarazada, pronounced embarazada. It sounds incredibly close to embarrassed, doesn't it? Imagine this. You're trying to order coffee, stumble over a few Spanish words, and in a moment of self-deprecating humor, you want to say, "Ugh, I'm so embarrassed by my Spanish." But instead, you blurt out, "Estoy embarazada." You've just told the barista and likely half the cafe that you are, in fact, pregnant. Their sympathetic smiles and sudden offers of a chair might give it away. The correct word for embarrassed is actually avergonzado for a man or avergonzada for a woman. Quite the difference, right? And that's just the beginning. Speaking of awkward situations, have you ever felt someone was really getting on your nerves? Maybe a persistent street vendor or a noisy neighbor at your hotel. You might instinctively reach for a word that sounds like molest. In Spanish, the word molestar, pronounced molestar, exists. But while it sounds like the English molest, its actual meaning is far less sinister. Molestar simply means to bother or to annoy. So, if you say, "No me molestes," "no me molestes," you're politely, or perhaps not so politely, telling someone, "Don't bother me." You're not implying anything darker. The key is context and understanding the subtle but significant difference in severity. It's a relief, but also a reminder that these phonetic traps are everywhere. Let's move on to health. You've woken up with a bit of a sniffle and a cough after a long flight. Your nose is stuffy and you're feeling under the weather. You head to a pharmacy trying to explain your symptoms. You recall a word that sounds like constipated, and you might say, "Estoy constipado." Estoy constipado. While you think you're describing a common digestive issue, what you've actually communicated to the pharmacist is that you have a cold or a stuffed nose. The Spanish constipado means to have a cold or to be congested. For the digestive issue, you'd need estreñido, estreñido. Imagine the confusion or even amusement on the pharmacist's face as you describe your runny nose and cough, all while using a word that suggests a completely different ailment. It's enough to blush all over again. What about talking about current events or something happening right now? You're discussing the actual situation in a new city. In English, actual refers to something real or true. But in Spanish, the word actual means current or present. So, if you're trying to say the actual problem is the traffic, and you say el problema actual es el tráfico, you've just said the current problem is the traffic. While not a huge gaffe, it's a subtle but important distinction. If you wanted to emphasize real or true, you'd use words like verdadero, verdadero, or real, real. It highlights how even seemingly harmless false friends can slightly shift the meaning of your message. Are you communicating exactly what you intend? And speaking of what you intend, imagine you're a budding entrepreneur trying to explain that you realized your dream of opening a small business. In English, to realize can mean to become aware of or to achieve. The Spanish word realizar, realizar, sounds almost identical. However, realizar primarily means to carry out, to perform, or to achieve in the sense of putting something into practice. So if you say realicé mi sueño, you're saying I achieved my dream, or I carried out my dream. which is often what you mean anyway. But if you wanted to say, I realized, became aware of, my mistake, you wouldn't use realizar. You'd use darse cuenta de. Darse cuenta de. This one's a bit more nuanced, but the potential for minor misinterpretation is still there. Sometimes, a single concept in English splits into two distinct words in Spanish, and vice versa. Take success, for instance. You've just completed a challenging hike and proudly declare it was a huge success. The Spanish word that looks like it, suceso, doesn't mean success at all. A suceso is simply an event or a happening. It could be a good event or a bad one. To describe your triumphant hike, you'd actually use the word éxito, which sounds suspiciously like exit. So, if you're boasting about your éxito, you're talking about your success, not making an urgent dash for the door. These two are often confused, painting a vivid picture of a tourist celebrating a successful journey by announcing they found the exit. It's a linguistic two-for-one trap. You're exploring a charming Spanish town, you spot a beautiful old building, and think that must be the library, because you see librería written above the door. But a librería isn't where you go to check out books, it's a bookstore. If you want to find the public library, you'd need to look for la biblioteca. So, if you walk into a librería expecting to borrow a novel and instead find yourself in a shop where everything is for sale, don't be surprised. You've simply walked into the Spanish equivalent of Barnes & Noble, not your local public lending institution. It's a small difference that can lead to quite a different shopping experience. And what about home furnishings? You're trying to spruce up your Airbnb and want to ask where you can find a carpet. You might look for carpeta. But if you ask for a carpeta, you won't be directed to the rug aisle. You'll be handed a folder or a file. A carpeta is something you put documents in. The Spanish word for a floor covering, like a carpet or a rug, is actually alfombra. So, next time you're trying to find something to keep your feet warm, remember to ask for the alfombra, not the carpeta, unless you need to organize your travel documents, that is. It's these small, everyday items that often lead to the biggest confusions. Now, let's talk about things you might consume. After a long day, you're feeling a bit grimy and want to take a refreshing shower. You ask for sopa. But sopa in Spanish doesn't mean soap, it means soup. So, if you're standing in a market asking for sopa, don't be surprised if they hand you a ladle and a bowl, or direct you to the food aisle. If what you really need is something to get clean with, you're looking for jabón. Just imagine trying to lather up with a bowl of tomato soup. It wouldn't end well, or at least it wouldn't end clean. This one often leads to a chuckle from native speakers and a quick lesson for the tourist. Thinking about education, many travelers are familiar with the English word college. In Spanish, colegio exists, but it typically refers to a primary or secondary school, basically a high school or even a grade school. It's not the higher education institution that college signifies in English. If you're talking about university-level studies, you'd use universidad or facultad. So if you proudly tell a local that your child is attending colegio, they might assume your child is still in their teens rather than pursuing a degree. The difference in meaning here can dramatically shift the perception of someone's educational journey. And finally, consider a word like fabric. You're admiring some beautiful textiles in a local market and want to ask where the fabric was made. The Spanish word fabrica might spring to mind. But a fabrica is a factory, a place of manufacturing. It's not the material itself. If you want to talk about the fabric of the cloth, you'd use tela. So asking where the fabrica comes from could lead to a very different kind of answer than you're expecting, perhaps a complex explanation of industrial supply chains rather than the simple origin of the beautiful pattern you admire. It's these kinds of subtle distinctions that keep us on our linguistic toes. These false friends aren't just tricky words, they're little linguistic landmines waiting to make your travel stories even more memorable, usually for humorous reasons. They remind us that language isn't just about translating words, but about understanding the culture and the subtle nuances that give those words their true meaning. The joy of travel is often found in embracing these little stumbles, learning from them, and ultimately connecting more genuinely with the people and places you visit. So next time you're about to use a Spanish word that looks uncannily like an English one, pause, take a breath, and just maybe save yourself an embarrassing moment, or at least give yourself a fantastic story to tell when you get home. It's all part of the adventure of truly diving into a new language.